this is the legislative committee meeting. And today is Monday, January 13th. It's now 5 p.m. on the money. And roll call, we are all here. Was there any changes that needed to happen to last month's minutes?
Nope.
John or Lauren, are you here for public comment?
I was just kind of wondering something.
Just go ahead and give your name and address for the record.
John Hamill, 20 Government Place, apartment 91 in the good old city of Amiana. I was wondering something. I was looking, and I was also at the community wellness meeting last week Friday, and I noticed down there that it said county board or something, or it was like representative of the county board speaking at the meeting, and apparently Elaine Mosher Campoli is now the, whom I would call acting representative to talk about what's going on at the county board meetings. To me, it seems like an inappropriate thing because we elect county board members to represent whether it's the city of Oneonta or our small towns. And I'm just kind of wondering, why don't we have an actual county board member there at the meetings or even at, say, council? It just, I looked at the meeting minutes and nothing states that nobody appointed Elaine to the part of honorary county board representative to represent the concerns of Oneonta, and I'd rather hear more or less from what the county board members say, or at least having one of them coming to these meetings.
So you're referencing the county human resource meeting?
Yeah, and also the city of Oneonta
Mm-hmm.
community wellness, and it's like, I like to hear at least from one of the representatives, not, no offense to Councilwoman Campoli, but nobody elected her to the county board.
Correct, but it was the agreement of the council members, you two correct me if I'm wrong, that since she's on the city committee and she was on the city task force for homeless, that she would bridge that gap and be the liaison between this governmental process and that governmental process, just so that we had a streamline of information, recognizing that we're not actively inviting the 4 representatives to our meetings,
Right.
but we wanted to make sure that there was continuity and transparency between the 2 bodies, so,
Okay.
okay?
See, I didn't know this, and I'm glad you told me
That's
this.
okay. We don't charge extra for that. All right, moving on, any correspondence? Hearing none, we'll move up to review of the administrative fee process. And today we have Steve Muirley with us. Oh, you did have a PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not a fun PowerPoint, it's really easy. Okay, administrative fees, how they work. Next slide. Okay, so the historical context of the administrative fee process, it began in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the fees were between $3.50 and $7 a day, so it depended on what item that you didn't turn in, it affected what the fee amount was.
Okay.
The fee schedule corresponded to what we call a hazard table, which required different inspection timelines based on occupancy. If you've ever played like Dungeons and Dragons or a game like it, it was an elaborate table of like, there's this many units, and it's a brick building, and it's this high, and this many stories, and there's a pet dog in there, then it's this hazard level. And if it's a 2-story house, but it's made out of wood, but it has a brick foundation, there's an elaborate table that we literally put all these random houses, buildings, structures into.
Mm-hmm.
It did not correspond to like the state code, it was just something that someone thought up somewhere that we determined was, that's how we were gonna do our inspection processes. Depending on what your property was on that hazard table, impacted when you had to get inspections done. So like a single family home might only need an electrical inspection every 9 years, and a furnace inspection every 6 years, and a housing inspection every 3 years. And it was just kind of an elaborate system of everyone was on different schedules. So So property owners would be like, well, I thought I turned that in, and we're like, well, you have to turn that in every 3 years, not every 6 years, and, oh, well, my electrical inspections do every 9 years, but my, smoke detector forms do annually, or maybe every 6 months, and it was just kind of an elaborate scheme of when stuff got turned in. And it took a lot for us to track it, and it took a lot for property owners to track it. So in 2019, we updated the code. We made uniform inspections 3 years. So everything for everyone is due every 3 years, with the exception of smoke detector forms. Smoke detectors require an annual inspection. The reason behind that was it makes it easy. Everyone knows exactly what they need to turn in, how frequently they need to turn it in. There's no elaborate table that we have to track, and we have to make sure that buildings haven't changed or gone up or down hazard levels. It's just every 3 years.
Okay.
And what's important about that is it actually mirrors the New York State Fire Code. So 3-unit structures and larger require 3-year inspections. New York State says that they're required, if you're not a 1- and 2-family home, you have to have a 3-year inspection. So basically what we did is we said, well, if New York State's doing that, if the uniform code is doing that, it makes it much easier for us to just tie our inspection requirements to that existing state ordinance. Also in 2019, we adjusted the fees so they're all the same. It made it functionally the same, easy to administer. It didn't matter if it was a smoke detector form or proper use form, all the fees were the same. So instead of being like, oh, well, this form is on this schedule and this fee structure, they all just were uniformly made the same. It made it easier for us to track. It also made it easier for us to insert into the computer to automate it. So we didn't have all these weird, random, different calculations and calculators going. It's one thing, it just generates it. All right, next. So the fun facts about Oneonta is we currently have about 15,331 residents, according to the census. Approximately 51% of the city of Oneonta's housing units are rental units. So I included, so we've got about 2,002 single-family homes, 411 two-unit homes, 93 unit homes, about 1,800 mixed-use or 4 or more greater units. So when you get into that, you can kind of see the number of units that we're inspecting on those schedules. 60% of these housing units were constructed prior to 1939. That means that a lot of these are old converted single-family homes. And in the multi-residence law, those are called old multi-dwelling units. So those are falling under a code that triggered in 1954. It's still enforceable today. We enforce that code as well as the property maintenance code on those properties. That's what most of our inspections are multiple residence law or property maintenance inspections. When new construction is done, the new construction falls under the new code, our current code, or whenever it was done. So if a house was altered in 2012, it's under that code. If a house is altered in 2019 or 20 or 21, it's under the code when it was converted. So some of these structures we're inspecting for current code, some of them we're inspecting for property maintenance code, and some of them were literally going back to a 1954 multi-residence law that is still in place in New York State. Okay, so we currently employ 4 staff members who are certified code officials. Certified code officials can enforce those regulations at the state level. Because most of those regulations are mirrored in our local law, we want certified people to do it. We have 2 that do primarily housing inspections and complaints. So tenant complaints and housing inspections are how we administer the program. We go out and do preemptive property maintenance inspections. And then if a tenant calls us and says, hey, there's something weird in my apartment, we go out and we do an inspection then. The only way we're able to access property is with the tenant allowing us into the unit. So if we send a letter and the tenant says you're not coming into my unit, we have to get a warrant. We are not allowed to force our way into people's apartments.
That's a state law.
It's just
United States Constitution.
Yeah, it's unconstitutional. So we are not allowed to just kick in doors, dig through people's stuff, unless we have a warrant. But for the most part, if you're calling us to complain, it's because you are calling us to complain about something your landlord's doing.
This is what I have to deal with on a regular basis. I just no, just say.
Okay, so those are the fun facts about our program and kind of the context in which we are operating in.
So So the 4 people, can we go back to that one slide? So 4
Yep.
people are trying to inspect within a 3-year period, 500, 2,300 structures? Do I have that correctly?
Yeah,
And
approximately.
what software are you using to keep all that 2,300?
Unicity. So the
Unicity.
people that publish the ICC code, which is the model code that we use, also own and operate a database, like a software system. So most of the stuff that we have is either automated or it's in that database so that we can access it quickly. I mean, understaffing or a lack of code officials is something that everyone's dealing with. There was a New York Times article, in Philadelphia, they were like, we have 3,000 residents per code official. So you're like, we're kind of mirroring that, because if you think about it, our 4 certified code officials, I'm one of them, and I'm not doing a ton of housing inspections. And one of them is an ordinance inspector, who we certified so that he could do fire inspections and respond to tenant complaints. So we have really 2 people doing the bulk of our housing inspections, to administer the program. And that's a reality that many municipalities are facing. Because even if we eliminated the inspection of single-family homes, the state requires us to do 3-unit and up. So even if we were to get rid of our local ordinance of 1 and 2 family homes, the 1,800 mixed-use and 93-unit homes would still all be required to be inspected per the state. So that's
Well, we know you're not inspecting single-family homes, but you are inspecting 2-unit homes, 3-unit homes in the mixed use.
we're inspecting single-family rental units as well.
Oh, rental units, okay.
So this is specifically rental units.
2002 rental units?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Housing units.
All right, sorry.
So it's a lot. I have a GIS map I can give you that shows where they're all located, and they're color coded by type of house. All right, next. Okay, so chapter 86 is where we keep all this stuff in the code. Basically, 8618 says it's unlawful to rent houses that don't have a CFC. So a certificate of compliance is basically what we issue when a property has done all of their required inspections. They've had housing inspections, they've had electrical, furnace inspections, they have all their paperwork in order, we issue them a certificate of compliance, they can legally occupy the building. This description includes what we require, which is basically a name and address, someone we can get a hold of. It also includes things like we can also request the number of units, a floor plan, size of rooms. The reason we request that information is because some of these buildings have been altered in a way that makes the layout very difficult, and we provide those to the fire department. So if the fire department has to respond to a property, there's one on the corner of Cedar Street that is a maze. It is a beehive of random doors and hallways, and so we on occasion will request additional information about the layout so that if first responders have to go there, they know what they're getting into. Okay, next. So, this goes on to tell you, every 36 months, you have to renew your certificate of compliance. There's a couple of exceptions in there, fraternities and sorority houses we inspect annually. And then other types of assemblies like bars, they're inspected annually. New York State requires that. So some things our local ordinance will require an inspection, some things state code requires inspections. Any of our 3-unit and up residential properties, any of our public assemblies, they all are on a 3-year inspection. Public assemblies like bars and restaurants, they might be on a 1-year inspection requirement depending on the occupant load of the building. So basically what that says is like a place like the B-side is on an annual inspection, a place like Dunkin' Donuts is on a 3-year inspection. And New York State sets all that. So this section of the code basically is just kind of saying, not only do you have to have a certificate of compliance, you also have to renew it every 3 years, and it kind of describes that kind of program that I just said. Okay, next. Independent inspections. This is the inspections that are done by non-city staff. So these inspections are done by master plumbers, master electricians, electrical inspectors, sprinkler contractors. These are all the things that we don't inspect because we either can't because of the law, or we can't because we don't know enough to do the inspections. So, for example, Appendix J of the residential code describes how you inspect residential heating equipment, and it even provides a form for it. What we did was we took that form out of the residential code and we're like, here you go, this is what you need to supply us. The code says you should be doing these maintenance inspections annually as a property owner. We require proof of it every 3 years. So what we're saying is, yeah, we don't need to see that you're having your furnace serviced annually, but we want to at least know that you're doing it on some sort of schedule. What those inspections look like, some of them are like, are there gas leaks? Is there a carbon monoxide issue? Is the furnace not firing correctly? Are there holes in the flue pipe? Like, they're basically maintenance inspections to make sure that, someone doesn't die. Sprinkler inspections, we had one that came back where the property owner had turned the water off to the sprinkler, it was entirely dry. Part of the reason we have these inspections and the reason they're done by certified inspectors is they know what to look for and how to test it. Electrical inspections are the same way. I'm not an electrical inspector, I know residential electrical work, I don't know how to inspect it at Corning, for example. So these third-party inspectors do inspections and provide our office with those inspection reports in compliance with the requirement schedules for certificates of occupancy or compliance. Some of those, like elevators, fire alarm inspectors and installers, those are all licensed through the state. So even if I wanted to inspect an elevator, I legally cannot because the state says you are not licensed to do that. So basically, all these tests are done by independent contractors. They then provide us with copies to the office, and then we put them into the database showing that these inspections have been done in accordance with our local ordinance. The state code requires some of these inspections. So like the state code requires an annual, an NFPA require annual inspections of some of these items, like sprinkler systems, for example. That's not a local ordinance. We require them to turn those inspections into us to be a local ordinance. However, the state law, the uniform code says these are inspections that should be done. So our local ordinance makes those inspections be turned into the code office. If we did not have a local ordinance doing that, I would just have to run around and chase around sprinklers and be like, hey, did you get this turned in? And if not, I have to write you a ticket.
So, sorry, could you just clarify, so these have to be done routinely, but routinely isn't defined, is that right?
Every 3 years.
Every 3 years, there needs to be proof that it has been done every 3 years?
Correct.
Okay,
With
got
the
it.
exception of things like, so sprinklers, the state code requires an annual inspection.
Okay,
So we require that they turn that annual inspection into us to show that they've done it.
okay,
Fire alarm panels require annual inspections, so we require that those be turned into us.
okay,
Most single-family homes, you're gonna have a heating inspection, you're gonna have an electrical inspection, we're gonna do a property maintenance inspection, you're gonna turn in a smoke detector form, and you're gonna turn in an address thing that says, hey, that I still own this building and this is how you get a hold of me.
okay.
Um,
And is that, not to take too much responsibility off of a property owner, but do we give them anything that says, like, this is what we're expecting from you annually or every 3 years when they
We have a
register?
requirement schedule that's generated, that
Okay.
we send to that individual.
Okay,
That
cool.
lists all the dates the inspections are due,
Okay,
what the inspections are, and when they were last turned in.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, next one. Okay, so this is where we get into, if a property owner says you can't inspect my property, we can get a warrant, we can go to a judge, or we can just do exterior inspections. If we do an exterior inspection and we find that there's reasonable or probable cause that the house is not being maintained, then we can actually go and we can get a warrant and do an inspection. We've done that at least twice. But typically, tenants usually want us to come in and look at their property because they have a list of things they want fixed. All right, next. This starts to describe how we do the fee system. So before we do any sort of fee, the code says we're required to notify them that a fee could happen. We're required to provide them with a way to appeal the fee, and we're required to provide them with a copy of the fee schedule. So that's the section 1. Then 2 and 3 basically say, if you don't pay this fee, it will be levied onto your taxes. It also goes into detail and says, it can be a lien on your property, and then the common council can amend the date of the final payment. So it kind of sets the groundwork for, we have to notify you before we send you a fee. We are required to tell you how to appeal the fee, and we're required to tell you what the fee is. And that's what it says. Then there's an exception for like foreclosed properties. Those fees are passed to the current owner. All right, next. Okay, so this is the appeal part. Any person wishing to dispute any finding related to an administrative fee is allowed to go to the Board of Public Service. They must appeal it within 30 days of receiving the invoice for the fee. So what that does is it says if you get a bill, you get an administrative fee, you have 30 days to file an appeal form that will then go to the Board of Public Service. You get that when you're invoiced initially for an administrative fee, and then we send it a second time. So if you never turn in an inspection form and it just rolls all year and you get the maximum fee and we have to close it out at the end of the year, we send an annual closeout invoice. So even if you never appealed your first notice, at the end of the year, we give you a second shot at the apple. So after you've failed to comply with the code all year long, and we do our year-end closeout, you get a second invoice that says, hey, we're closing out at the end of the year, you've never complied, you have 30 days to appeal this if you believe you received it in error.
But meanwhile, the administrative fees are just accruing.
Yep. Right,
Right.
exactly.
Even during the first initial 30 days.
No.
After that?
So what happened, we're not to that part yet.
Okay.
We'll get to the nuts and bolts. Basically, this is the code saying, the way you appeal this is if you get an invoice and it says you owe us $500 and it's an administrative fee, you have 30 days to say, hey, I shouldn't have got that bill.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. All right, so here's what to expect when you expect admin fees. This is an exact copy of the letter that we send out to people. I even brought a physical copy of it so you can look at it up close and personal. So if you look at this, in accordance with our code, basically this letter says, hey, we believe you're the owner of this property, you're the person we have on file. You're required to supply this office per chapter 86 with periodic inspection reports. As of this date, our office has not received the forms listed below. And if you look there, those little bulleted things, those are generated forms that we don't have. So our program literally will say, you don't have this, and this turned in. Next to that it says, they're due on this date. And then next to that it says, if you don't turn them in, it's $250 on the first day and $10 every day after. So that little bulleted area not only tells you when the thing is due, it also tells you what you will be charged if you fail to turn it in. Everything has a 60-day ticker except sprinklers, smoke detectors, and fire alarm panels. So anything related to basically fire safety is on a 30-day ticker. All the other stuff is a 60-day ticker. And that falls under kind of how we enforce the uniform code. So basically, courts have determined that things that are of high fire safety importance can have a shorter timeline than things on lower fire safety importance. So when we get into how that period starts, you have 60 days. If I haven't turned in a property use form or a contact form, or if I haven't had an electrical inspection, I get 60 days before I have to turn that form in before I get a fee. So once you get this certified letter, it says certified and regular, once you get this letter, you still have 60 days before those fees tick for most things. Smoke detector forms, you can fill out yourself. So the day you get this letter, you can go in and you can push the buttons and check your smoke detector. You fill out the form, you send it to me, we buzz it in. You don't need a third-party inspector to do that. Property use forms, those are the contact forms that say, hey, how do we get a hold of you? What's your address? How do we mail you stuff? You can literally fill that out the day you get this letter. You can send it back to us. You're good to go. So some of these things you can literally do yourself and just immediately turn them in. The third-party inspector stuff gets a little tricky because you've got to line up a contractor. A lot of times if people have a problem with those, they call us and they say, hey, I'm trying to get this inspection done. The guy's coming out, it's gonna be more than 60 days. We say, give us something in writing, give us a date, we don't put the fees on. So yeah, so basically that's describing how the fee structure works, when it comes in, how much it's gonna be, how much it is a day, and we send these certified and regular. So if we either get a green card back, saying that someone signed for the letter, if they don't sign for the letter, which some people do, they just refuse to take the certified mail, unless the regular mail is sent back to us as undeliverable, we assume that we have met the requirement of this code. We've mailed it to you, certified and regular. So finally, the letter says, if you feel you've received this notice in error, give us a call. And we provide a phone number and an email address. And then finally, at the bottom, this housing appeal, we say, if you don't think you even need these inspections done, you can appeal that as well. So within 10 days of receipt of this letter, if you say, this is a single family home and I have 3 people that I live with, it's not a rental property, you can file an appeal and you can go in front of a city board and say, I am not subject to these regulations because I do not have a rental property. And then, on top of all that, we literally mail you a copy of the ordinance that says all that, as well as the fee schedule that says what all the things are, how many days you have to comply, what it's gonna be if you don't, and what it is every day for non-compliance. So this is what a packet you would get in the mail if you were to get admin fees. Okay, next. And there you go. That's just a close-up of, hey, I shouldn't even have this because I'm not a rental property. And then I think there's one, go to the next, yeah. This is back to the appeal. If you appeal an administrative fee, the only mechanism to appeal that fee is we made an error. We sent you something we shouldn't have, we lost a piece of paper, we, I don't know, fabricated an inspection you didn't need, but you were required to provide that documentation to the Board of Public Service. Their authority to wipe out fees is directly correlated to a failure on the city's part to administer the fee system correctly. The only exception to that is if it is a single family owner occupied home. And that is few and far between. I'm not sure we've ever seen an owner occupied. I think we've had like a roommate situation, stuff like that, but those aren't typical. We typically are not seeing administrative fees waived for financial hardship on an owner occupied property. Sometimes that happens with snow shoveling, lawn cutting, garbage removal. But for administrative fees, they don't typically, the stars don't align on that. You don't have a lot of those types of properties in the city. And that's it. That is how the system works. That is the day-to-day. And then also, I add to this, we track these. So most properties that get one of these letters, our policies typically, we don't send these letters until we at least have 60 days of non-compliance. So typically, we're not sitting and going, hey, this guy went out of compliance today, let's send him an admin fee letter. This is usually a mechanism we're using when we find someone who's 90 days, 6 months, a year, that's when we're sending these types of letters. Generally, these impacts, I think Jenny and I looked through the notes, it was something like less than 10% of the population. So it's a minority of our rental properties.
So like 400,
Yeah, I mean, it's small. It's very
because
small.
you're doing 4,300.
I mean, ideally. Obviously, some of those properties aren't getting inspected every 3 years. I mean, it's a cycle of, because you have some people who miss a housing inspection for a whole cycle. They'll sit and not comply for 2, 3, and we'll chase them and we'll write tickets and we'll do admin fees and, but yeah, I mean, usually these are not something that's impacting a majority. 51% of our properties are rental, and 51% of the property owners in Oneonta are not getting admin fees. It's not even close to that. I know it's less than 10%. I won't even say it might be less than 5%.
Okay. So the software that you used, I thought you said Unicity?
Yep.
Okay, so Unicity does that give you like an alarm, a notification that these are the homes or buildings that are up for inspection? What, I mean, how, you said that you go maybe 60 days before you send a letter out hoping that the building owner is gonna do the
Yeah.
right thing.
I mean, so what we're doing is, I mean, in a perfect world, I call it a perfect world. In an AI controlled world where we just would generate these letters like, oh, 1 day out, cool, here's your admin letter. 1 day out, here's your admin letter. 1 day out, here's, I mean, we typically don't do that because we give people, I don't wanna say leeway, but I mean, we just don't have the administrative capacity to generate admin fees for every one of those properties the minute they're out of compliance. It would be, I don't know if we wanna live in a world where that's how it works, you know, I mean, it becomes like a very,
So how does a property get up on your radar then?
so what'll happen is we'll receive a tenant complaint,
Okay.
and we'll go into that address and say, oh, this property's not in compliance, oh, they're missing 4 other forms. Property transfers, if it's sold, we'll do a title the title company will contact us and say, is this property in compliance? And we're like, oh, it's not. We do, when we have time, we'll go through and actually do kind of audits of properties that have certificates of compliance. And then once we generate those lists, we'll come up with, oh, we've got, 60 properties that need admin fee letters, because they're that far out of compliance. But typically, like I said, we're not, this isn't a money generating operation. We're not trying to go after people who are trying to comply with the code. And even the New York State Uniform Code, if you ask a Department of State employee, supervisor, they'll tell you, willing compliance is what we're looking for. Like the Uniform State Code, like when I contact the Deputy Director of Code Enforcement at the Department of State, he's not like, yeah, stick it to him. Because it's hard, it's difficult. It involves court and legal fees, and so they're like, what we're looking for is someone to comply willingly. Send them a notice, give them the time they need, try to work with them to get them to comply. Court is always the last best option. Administrative fees are applied similarly. We attempt to get people to comply willingly. We attempt to contact people. We try to get people to comply without having to go to beat them over the head with the biggest stick we got. And some people require this. I mean, we have people that eventually, this is,
Stephen knows that whenever he contacts me, first question I ask is, get authority from somebody for me to start putting me on the ticker, because, I start billing city, and I want somebody to know right up front that it's gonna cost money to do it, and sometimes it's worthwhile, sometimes it's philosophic, sometimes, you gotta go after somebody because it's super dangerous, or.
right. Yeah, so it's tricky. So this is kind of like our code allows me to write tickets that can be up to $1,000 a day per day of violation.
If they
So-
can be enforced.
Right, so like with the Oneonta Hotel, we use that mechanism. Administrative fees weren't effective because it wasn't enough money. So what we did was we took that property to court using the same statute, but we used $1,000 a day per violation, per day of violation. So for 30 days of violation, for every violation, you're looking at a $30,000 court fine, up to a $30,000 court fine. Multiply that by 10, there have been cases in Schenectady where a judge awarded like $670,000 in court fines for that same mechanism, $1,000 a day per day of violation per violation. We do not typically go after 2 and 3 family homeowners with $1,000 a day per day of violation code tickets. And most people, when they receive this letter, immediately call us or contact us and say, hey, I got this letter. What does this mean? What do I need to do? What do I need to, and we work with those people because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for compliance. We're not looking to put them on administrative fees. Yes.
When you do the year-end wrap-up, the administrative fees get levied on the property, right?
Correct.
And then does the clock begin again? Like, is it another, do you keep doing $10 every day, or is it, like, how does it work?
County, or
Well, so the way it works is if you.
Like if they're still not in compliance?
Right, so what happens is, at the end of the year, we only close those fees out because the city's required to close the fees out.
Right,
Once we close that fee, the ticker just keeps going, because
Okay.
it doesn't stop until you turn the form. The idea is that we want the fee to go until you comply with the code.
right,
So if you don't turn the form in, if you don't have the inspections done, if you're not in compliance, then the ticker does not stop.
gotcha. So say you were, assessed fees of $1,000, and then at the end of the year, those fees went to the county, they were re-levied. Your fees with the city would be $10, in addition to the 1,000 that's at the county, it would be 1,010. But it would continue to go up.
Yeah, so once it's closed out, you'd be re-levied $1,000, that'd be on your taxes, and then the next morning, it'd be $10,
Okay,
and that would continue to tick.
okay, just trying to understand that, thank you.
So hypothetically, a building was a 2-unit or a 3-unit, and it went under the radar for 5 years, hypothetically.
Yep.
And then tenants complained about violations that they
Correct.
felt. So that brought your staff into the building.
Correct.
And then you found violations and then found out that this property actually hadn't been inspected for
Correct.
3 years.
Yep.
You wouldn't hypothetically put administrative fees retroactive 5
There- you
years.
can't do
would
that.
You would start
Yeah,
at
yeah,
that day.
you cannot do, there's no retroactive, so
Okay,
if we go to a property, cause good people forget to do things.
Sure.
Good landlords forget to do things. So yeah, if we were called to a property like that, we wouldn't be like, oh, you're gonna be assessed retroactive fees or some sort of, we would contact the owner. We would probably mail an admin fee letter that day. Because if it's one where we find like, it's really far out of compliance,
Right.
we would say, cool, you've got a couple years, I mean, it's like speeding. You drove 70 every day and finally one day the state trooper sees you and writes you a ticket. So I mean, in a situation like that, we would send an administrative fee letter giving them 60 days, and then whatever we found would be under the same housing inspection requirement that we have, it'd be a 60-day compliance. Some items, the Uniform State Code says 30 days.
Right,
So-
fire safety.
Yep, fire safety stuff.
Okay.
So if we go into a property and there's no, depending on the type of property, the fire extinguishers are 5 years out, and the smoke detectors are hanging off the ceiling and have shower caps on them, and we would require immediate correction for some of those items. But those would not have admin fees. What's important to note is code violations don't have admin fees. So if I go into a house and inspect it and I find code violations, you fulfilled the requirement of having a housing inspection. That's what gets an admin fee, failure to comply with the housing inspection. If I find code violations, you're on a 30-day or a 60-day ticker to correct them. Failure to comply with those, I have to rectify through court. So those are not admin fees. So if I go to a house and there's a lot of code violations, I can write all those up, and I do write them up as state code violations. And then we go into what does the Department of State say I can do? I can give them what they say in the code is a reasonable time to comply.
Mhm.
Case law is set up that's between, it's about 30 days, depending on the violation. So we'll give them a notice that we'll be back in 30 days. If it's not corrected, that's when we have to start talking about, like, is this worth going to court? Is this worth, doing another reinspection on a shorter clock? Like, how do we kind of get compliance through that mechanism? So if you get a furnace inspection done and your furnace inspection fails, you've met the requirement. You've got the inspection done, you've turned it in. Any problems found in that inspection are now code violations. They're not on the administrative fee.
Right. But it does put you on a timeline that if you don't have the funds to immediately get at those issues, you're on a clock and
And that's established through state law. I mean, that's not a city of Oneonta issue, that's a New York State law thing. So New York State New York State has adopted the Uniform Code, which is the ICC set of codes. They've amended them into the New York State Code. We call it the Uniform Code. That set of code books is a state law that we enforce through a local ordinance. So what our local ordinance does is says, here's the state code, we're adopting it, and we're enforcing it per the state. Failure to do that, if we're out of compliance with our own inspections, like if we're not doing or administering the state code correctly, the state can come in and operate our code office for us. So we're audited annually to make sure that we're doing, you know, the inspections, to make sure that we're in compliance with what the state says we should be doing. So, us issuing tickets, us requiring compliance with the New York State Uniform Code is part of state regulation, not part of the local ordinance.
Right.
So pressure to make people fix stuff is as much coming from, you know,
The state.
STAD as it is from our local government.
So, you're saying less than 5%?
It's, I had Jenny run the numbers, I know it's less than 10%.
Right, so between 5 and 10% are kind of the properties that are consistently not doing their inspections on time, because administrative fees are only coming out of inspections.
Yep.
Whether it's generated from your office or
Or-
third party.
Yep.
And so, for the folks that have commercial properties that require those third parties, how easy is it for them to get an inspector? And then what do you require, what form of communication are you requiring those property owners to show proof that the delay is coming from the third party?
So again, I mean, we're not trying to get people on admin fees.
Correct.
So if someone calls us and says, look, I'm aware that I need to get this inspection done, I've contacted a master plumber. He says he's gonna be 30 days later than my date. What we do is say, okay, there's an intent to comply with the code. This individual is not ignoring their responsibility, they're in communication with us, and they're like, hey, we're gonna get this inspected, it's just gonna be a little later than the date. They provide that to us in writing, they set the date, we say, great, if it's not done by then, we'll trigger the fee. I mean, it kinda goes back to the overarching position by the state, is we want people to comply because they wanna comply.
Right.
This is not a way to go after people and generate revenue for the city. So if, again, because we're not running like on an AI, you know, just mechanized, which we could, I mean, we could probably figure that out.
Sure.
But that's when you would start to get into like, well, if everyone can't, if there aren't enough electrical inspectors to inspect every house every day they're due,
That's where I'm headed with all this.
yeah.
Right,
there's-
that's the complaint that I have heard for years, is that there's not enough third-party inspectors out there
Right.
to do the job in the city of Oneonta, because I'm not thinking it's our requirements, it's state requirements, right?
So, for example, like, we require a master plumber to inspect heating equipment. We reciprocate licensing with Binghamton, we reciprocate licensing with Albany, we reciprocate licensing with Norwich. So if I'm a plumber in Albany, or if you're a property owner and you own a building here, you can have a master plumber from Binghamton come and do the inspection. You can have a master plumber from Albany come and do the inspection. You can have a sprinkler contractor who's licensed in, I know, we have one from Syracuse who's licensed in Syracuse that comes down and does inspections here. So yeah, I mean, there is a narrative that like, well, I can't find a guy in Oneonta to do this inspection. Well, we reciprocate with pretty much every licensing community around us.
And that's information that people can get if they called
Yep.
the code enforcement office, they'd say, oh, I know a guy from Syracuse who will come.
We can, yep,
Cool.
because those other contractors, what we tell people is, if they're licensed, have them call us. If they're licensed, they need to, what we don't want are people who are not qualified to do sprinkler inspections, doing sprinkler inspections. We don't want people that are not qualified to install heating equipment, inspecting heating equipment for safety. It's just, that's what we don't want.
However, getting a master plumber to come in from Albany or Syracuse, Binghamton ain't cheap either.
Right.
That's if you can get them to come.
Yeah.
Ahani is a great example, they do a ton of business in Oneonta, they're from Binghamton.
Yeah, they have at least, well, they used to have at least one of their employees lives.
Who lives here?
Yeah, but I don't know where they moved, they were like a block away from me.
So I mean, it's one of those like,
One in the driveway next to my house at lunchtime today, so, you know, they're still doing work.
Right.
So, I mean, we have, Norwich, we have a couple guys come out of Norwich to do stuff. I mean, what I try to tell people is you have 3 years to line up these inspections. I mean, it's not, so by the time you get this form, you're out of compliance. You should not be making.
60 days.
Yeah, I mean, you should not be making calls when you get this letter. Because what this letter says is you have 60 days to find a guy to do something. So, because we generate these requirement schedules that are accessible to the property owner, you go, oh, my electrical inspection's due in 6 months, I should probably schedule that. Yeah.
Sorry, you can keep going. It wasn't urgent.
And my taxes due on April 15th, and I always, and I was in October before then, I said, I really start working on my tax return.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, these people are preparing for that inspection date before they get a letter that says, hey, we haven't seen your forms, you're probably 60 days overdue. You might want to call a guy.
How can a property owner access the requirement schedule other than when they first register the property? Is it
Call
something
us.
that they can?
Email us.
Okay,
We generate a
okay,
We have people that come in every 6 months, just get it.
okay.
We print them off, we email them. We even have a public portal that's accessible to the property owner that they can print their own requirement schedule.
That's what I was wondering, because that would be really handy, like if you were just wondering if you could log in and figure out.
Yeah, just click on it.
So we go to the code enforcement webpage, and you can find that portal?
Yeah, we even had instructions on how to get to it.
Okay.
Nice.
I'm gonna overshare a little, but I've been through all of these processes personally, including going to the board and talking to them, including needing help at court, and stuff, and code has always been helpful and understanding and supportive, and like, as long as you are communicating, I don't remember all the things, like, they're not out to get anybody. Like, the board could have easily shot down my request. They did not. They heard me, they understood, you know what I mean? Like, they're not out to, like, get you with fees or take you out or anything. They are looking for you. And I want to say, too, like, because prior to this, I've been around long enough that I was here with the whole, like, 6-year, 3-year, 9-year thing. That was insane. Keeping track of everything. I was getting those letters a lot. Keeping track of them all varied. But yeah, so, and including having had fees levied on my taxes, I've had that part happen too. But it's not anything you don't know about. You're getting a letter in the mail, they're giving you opportunity to correct or fix it, and, I think my case was a little bit out of the norm. Way out of the norm. I had squatters during COVID, and then people who continued to squat and like try to destroy the place. That's a whole other story for another day. But just as somebody who's been through the process, I can say, and this was pre me being on council, you know what I mean? Like, so this is me just as an average citizen of Oneonta feeling like,
One of the issues we had with the 3, 6, 9 stuff, what was happening is we would have student rental properties that you would have 2 full classes of students going through, and a lot can happen with the lacrosse team in 9 years. And a lot of changes can occur to the property if you have, 6 guys living there for, 2 rounds of freshman to senior graduations, fraternity parties, you name it. So we kind of changed those requirements too, just to kind of address some of the property maintenance issues we were running into on a 9-year inspection.
Any more questions?
Nothing specific.
So we were presented a question last month, and that's kind of the feedback I'd like to move into now, is we were presented the question of what can we do as a legislative body to maybe help those 4,300, well, it sounds like we're down to job of maintaining the record keeping? Because that's what it sounds like, from your perspective and from the gentleman that was here last month, it really sounds like an administrative issue. Even Shannon was just alluding that it's not an easy task, keeping those requirements in the forefront. What do you think we could do differently as a partner with these business owners, these property owners, because we want them to be here, to stay here, to generate income? What do you think we could do differently?
I mean, right now, I feel like the city, I mean, I think what happened was partially during COVID, we had a lot of people buy investment properties. So what we're seeing now is our first wave of, I bought an investment property during COVID, right? I thought I would just be able to buy a property and go to yachts and not do anything, right? So we're getting our initial wave of, what do you mean I have to do? What do you mean? What is all this? So, the case, the person that was here last time, I mean, that was a tricky one because, again, that's one where the person said, I knew about it, I got the letter, I was aware, I just didn't. Okay? I mean, that's not the city's, I mean, that individual said, I not only was aware of it, but I am a longtime property owner who knows of this process. So what we tried to do, again, is it's again, speeding tickets, like parking tickets, we are not methodically going through and hammering everyone that we can. We attempt to, what we started doing now is, when we send these letters, if we have an email address for the person, we send an email with them. Just to try to be more, I guess, to try to
Proactive.
Yeah, more proactive. But again, I don't want to fault the office because I think that we're already doing a significant amount of work to make sure these people know that they have a requirement.
Right. So I know that it would be an initial cost up front, but what if we sent a letter that had all of the information that Katie's brought up a couple of times of these are your checkpoints, these are your links, go here, you can find your own portal here, and we need your email. And then, if, say you only get,
You know, print out when they send it that says like, it's, you know, approved as to this date. Yeah, so it says on the thing that they sent you, these things are due this date, and then you also can go online and see.
Well, so for example, like one of the forms that some people don't turn in is literally a form that says, how do we get a hold of you?
It is.
And we mail that to you when you buy a house.
right,
So I mean, one of the problems we run into is there are people that literally don't even fill that form out. They're like, hey, what's your phone number? What's your name? What's your email address?
right,
I mean, so we run into that where what property transfers and the person that transfers the property will not respond to the initial letter saying, hey, we see you bought a house, please let us know who you are. Then we send in a second letter that says, hey, we have a requirement schedule. If this is a rental property, you need to fill this out and send it back.
right.
People don't turn that in. So it is very, you know, we have contact information for the people that are complying. The people that are doing this right,
Right.
we have that
That's the way.
information for.
You have their email.
Yeah, we have. I mean, the people that are doing it right, we're not having a hard time getting a hold of, and they're turning their paperwork in, and, you know, the world's sunshine and roses. It's that little percentage of people who already aren't following the process
Right.
that we have a hard time sometimes getting a hold of. And I would say,
In my experience, many of them are naive purchasers. They're from downstate, and they have heard how much is being charged per room, per semester in upstate New York, where they don't have to worry about dealing with the New York City code enforcement people who are around and building, there's no such thing as zoning. What do you mean, we're upstate, there's no zoning upstate? And they get involved. And they buy it from somebody downstate. They buy it from somebody who's exiting who's exiting the business because they found out that things are going down the tubes, and then they go out, and I run into it all the time where I'm representing somebody, said, make sure that you get certificate of compliance first. And then they start finding out, they say, well, how would I find out? I said, check with code enforcement. Code enforcement says there is no certificate
suggestion of, I appreciate the 60-day leeway, but maybe the computer, the software should be producing that letter on the day of their inspection to say, by the way, in 60 days, we're gonna send you this letter.
So we used to do, what we call admin 1 and admin 2 letters.
Okay.
So we used to send out certified and regular an admin 1 letter that said, hey, you're not gonna get a fine, but in X amount of days, you will receive an admin 2 letter.
Right.
And then after that, you'll receive, but what that did was, it ends up tying up a lot of administrative time, because you have to have someone who's then sitting at a computer, tracking 60-day out non-compliance, and then we're sending certified letters, you're doubling the cost of every mailing.
Right, I was just thinking emails though. I mean, if the people that are complying are the ones that have an email account, and the ones that are somewhat complying have an email account, generating an email doesn't cost either one of us money, but,
Yeah, we usually do. I mean,
oh, you are?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, this system is not the end of the, I mean, we'll call people, we email people, if someone comes to the window and says, hey, I'm here to do whatever, we're like, oh, hey, by the way, your whatever's due. We'll even do, so sometimes, like, let's say you need a certificate of compliance. You might have a property that meets all the inspections, but a furnace inspection is gonna expire in 3 days.
Okay.
We'll issue a certificate of compliance because it meets the requirement, and we'll mail them a schedule, a requirement schedule, and we'll even highlight, and we'll mail the form with it to say, hey, you got the certificate of compliance, but just so you're aware, your electrical inspection's gonna be overdue in 30 days. We'll highlight it, we'll include the form, and we'll mail it. So we're already doing a lot of this stuff, and that's why you're not seeing 25% of the people, 30%. It's this small number of people who, yeah, the fees are big. I mean, but also, if you think about it, the fees aren't really big because you don't pay a fee if you turn the thing in. And then you name your own fee if you don't. So if I don't turn the form in, I can pay $250, I can pay $300, or I can pay $3,000. It's kind of a pick your own adventure, because the only way the fee is increasing is if you're not complying.
Again, it's stabilized or it's on pause if they are communicating with you one way or the other.
We are not hitting people with administrative fees if they're contacting us and saying, look, I'm trying to comply, here's what I'm doing, here's the date I have my inspection, I'll have my plumber call you, I'll have my electrical. We're not, that's not the game. The game isn't, let's hit people with fees and raise revenue. So any revenue that's being generated is being generated on typically people that we are constantly having to contact. We're, hey, you're not doing this, you're not doing this, we're mailing you a letter, we're getting tenant complaints, I mean, that's where this is coming from, is the non-compliant people are the ones that suck up a lot of time. Because typically what you'll find is the people that aren't complying with this aren't complying with anything. They're the ones that were picking up garbage, we're shoveling their snow, we're mowing their lawns, and we're, getting calls from their tenants every 3 days to say they don't have heat or they don't have water. So this person, this generic person, it's kind of like the tuna fishing stuff. Every once in a while you catch a dolphin. Every once in a while someone will get an admin fee that really genuinely made a mistake. Just genuinely thought they were doing everything right, somehow lost this letter, somehow didn't understand, somehow, every once in a while you catch a dolphin. But usually the tunas are, usually the people that you're getting are the people that are not only not complying with this, they're not complying with lots of stuff. The cops are there, the fire department's there, we're there, they're regular kind of repeat offenders of not complying with city ordinances. And even sometimes with people that have tenant issues, like we will accommodate some of that stuff too. I mean, we're not trying to raise revenue off people that are in bad situations. But yeah, so like I said, the individual that was here before, I feel bad at the same time, it's hard for me to kind of pick and choose winners and losers when people come out and say, oh, I knew it, I just didn't do it. One option that we've thought or kind of kicked around is maybe doing, we have an ordinance that's, we have a blighted ordinance where if you have property that is in excessive dilapidation, we can declare it blighted, the Board of Public Service reviews it. We then require that property owner to supply us with a restoration plan. How am I gonna fix this? Timelines, dates, what I'm gonna do, when those inspections are gonna be done. And if they fail to follow through with that, there's a $2,000 administrative penalty. So, one thought we've had is maybe what we say with the administrative fees is instead of levying a fee, we require that person to enter in with an agreement to do improvements or corrections to the property in accordance with the fee. So if I have a $6,000 administrative fee, the city could enter into some sort of agreement and require that person to do X amount of improvement to the property. Or some way to maybe make these fees be more constructive.
Good to know, because I mean, you just said a couple of times, we're not in this to generate revenue, we're trying to get compliance.
Yeah, the thing you have to be careful about is rewarding the people who ignore.
You're not really rewarding, you're
No,
still
I-
making them move money, they're moving money to the city, going on a government, or investing into the
The point
property.
that I'm making is that if you got $6,000 in fees because you have refused, you knew that it was there and you didn't do it, you chose not to do it, you said, screw it, come after me, because there are people like that. And if you do that and then say, oh, okay, well, we'll cut it in half, and we'll give you another 6 months, then what you're doing is you're punishing the people who are in compliance. We've been doing it all the time, and you're rewarding bad actors. So you have to be careful not to always provide an escape path for the bad actor.
Right.
And that's the one thing, because, and again, I'm sensitive to these, because they're the ones I see. They never get the typical person. who
Right,
comes
you didn't go down the path I thought you were gonna go, I thought you were gonna go down the path that, well, someone could hold out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, get to the $7,000-8,000 range, and then the Public Service Board says, well, just invest that in your property. So they avoided compliance, and then were able to shift the money, their revenue over.
I mean, so some of those people we would just ticket. We would start to enter into like, we're in a phase where you're in violation of the law. You're renting a property without certificate of compliance. We can take you to court for that. We can give court fines on that. My thought with the administrative fee thing is just as a way for like, what I would say smaller
Sure.
people that have complied and, you know, $600, $1,000. But it was just a thought.
And as much as I love you guys and all this, I am here to talk about parliamentary procedure stuff.
Oh, I thought you were here for Steve, so.
And no,
Oh, okay. Okay.
Is there any chance we can talk about that before it turns into a
I think B and C are relatively quick, we're probably not talking about B today.
House and what was it? House that's unlawfully occupied.
Unoccupied.
Yeah.
So like if somebody comes and stays in it, or it's like their house but they travel,
Then it's not vacant.
okay.
Yeah, so if it's lawfully occupied, it's not vacant.
You can go on vacation, you don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any sort of like minimum requirement?
We have an
For-
entire section in the code that describes exactly what a vacant property is.
Okay, I think I've read it, but I'm just wondering, just following up on that train of thought. I don't know if it's the same house, but someone did complain about a house in the third ward to me. No. What? Regarding the specific situation that led us here, I do have a follow-up question, but maybe I'll ask it afterward.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You were the man on the hour.
Yeah, thank you.
More.
That was great, by the way, just to really deeply understand that, because I think, obviously, code enforcement is sort of the department of the city that people interact with, not always under pleasant circumstances, you know, so the more that we can understand, I think the more we can help support
I think,
their understanding to make it a better
I
process.
think the thing with code enforcement is a majority of people that interact with our office do interact with us on great terms. I think we just hear from the handful that do not.
That's fair, yeah.
I mean, those are the people that come to appeal, and those are the people that are the ones that are mad because we did something that
Right.
impacted them negatively. But we deal with people
had a chance to read the agenda, correct?
Yes?
Sorry. Trying to pull it up. So, was there any changes? No. Is there any changes to the Parks and Recreation law ordinance?
The only thing that I would like to suggest is that we strike the word bicycles, because I think that it's perfectly fine to ride or set down your bicycle in the park, but, maybe we could qualify it by saying like motorized bicycles or something like that, cause we wouldn't want those, I mean, in my opinion, you wouldn't necessarily want those riding all around on the grass, it's more of like a, pavement vehicle. But, that's the only thing that to me just seems like
Okay. Actually, I didn't
counter.
think about that. That's actually a good point, because you're gonna ride across or off the driveway, paved area to go over the greenway. I mean, I think we have this paved now, but you're right, so,
Or like a kid rides over to the playground and drops his bike, you know what I mean?
right.
Inadvertently in violation of the code, that's silly, so,
Issue a ticket to the 8-year-old.
yeah,
Okay.
so, that would be my only thing.
Alright. Shannon, what do you think? Strike the word bicycle.
I think that's fine.
Just so you know, we don't have not a lot of cop time in the park. We can
Right.
see if people pulling their bicycles down.
Right, well, that may be true, but we have the opportunity to make
Although
it,
the city
clarify the
did
intent.
get sued one time for a kid who was riding his bike through the woods and he hit a stone and
Oh,
and
jeez.
fell off
That's probably why
his
this is.
bike and then sued us because we didn't have our trails sufficiently cleared for bicycles, but leaving a hazard because it was a stump in the woods.
Right.
Forgive my
Probably why this
cynicism,
statute
but
exists.
Why are we allowing section 194-4 about flyers? I was surprised to see that in this piece of legislation. I didn't know that we would allow folks to have a fire pit.
Yeah, we have like the grills.
We have grills in parks.
Maybe we shouldn't.
That's one of my favorite. That's why it's there.
I guess it's a terminology.
Don't set stuff on fire in the park. Seems like a good rule to me.
Charcoal is one thing. Okay. I'm taking it, Carrie, we haven't had too many issues with this, so. Okay. Any other changes, Shannon?
Nope.
Okay. So we're all in agreement to strike the word bicycles?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Moving on to, Carrie, you good with that?
Do you want this to go back to you again, or you
No,
ready?
just let's move it up to full council. We've looked at it 3 times. Good with the language, potential language for the Board of Ethics? Thought Carrie got it exactly the way we wanted it.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only thing I'm wondering is about the subsequent appointments, like when my appointee, my nominee is up in 3 years. Are you guys tracking that? Like, oh, it's somebody, the 4th ward gets to nominate somebody, since they're not all at the same time, do you know what I mean?
How about, we also acknowledge anybody stepping off, they didn't actually serve the full commitment. That would allow that council member to select another person.
Right.
So is there language that we could wordsmith to that?
Appointments all go through the clerk's office, so we track who serves and who gets,
Correct.
all that happy stuff.
Okay, so you feel like that's
And
fine?
then this one has not gone through Dave yet, so this one will go to Dave for review first.
Right,
Okay.
but if we could just add the language of whomever has been selected by that ward council member, if they step off or they finish their term, a new one is selected by that.
Yeah, it would automatically happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
That language is there?
It's, because the term is selected, that appointment is done by the council member.
Okay.
So it's stated in there by the members would be served by that board.
Okay.
Each member of the
be a city resident, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Just making sure.
Just checking.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
cool.
we're up to the city attorney. He would like to talk about the parliamentary procedure.
No, I wouldn't like to talk about it, but apparently somebody else does, or I wouldn't be.
Well, she told me it was an easy read. I mean, page 12.
It's not just me, I just like to follow rules, especially if we formally adopt them, that's all I'm saying. So,
David sat here for an hour, 15 minutes.
that was fun though, right? Like, you're into that stuff.
I'm glad that those of you who are here had the opportunity to listen to it.
That was great.
Because again, very often I'm his psychologist and will call me and say, you understand that something, and I was like, I get it. So it's
Yeah, it was
good, it's
very
good for you
helpful.
to get a sense of what it does.
Yeah. For sure.
So, what kind of views?
So, 6 years, 5 years, 6 years. Five.
This is our 6th year.
This is our beginning of our 6 years. You gave us a little bit of class.
Yes.
We didn't go into.
And I don't think anybody since then has had
Did you give everybody else
such a
something?
class.
No, I tried to schedule orientation for the new common council members that I was told wasn't necessary. And I said, okay,
By whom?
by the mayor. I said, I think, wouldn't it be a good idea if we schedule an orientation for the new council members? And they said, well, it's really necessary. Okay.
Having personal feelings behind my
Probably.
Put that on paper.
I have an outline that I use, and I
Yep.
give an hour and a half. Don't quote me on the fact that don't say that I told the mayor and he said it wasn't really necessary.
Did the mayor say you didn't miss him?
I frankly don't remember.
Now he's backtracking.
I'm definitely.
So the mayor didn't say.
I don't believe you did, but I remember suggesting it be done and it wasn't done.
Okay, so moving forward.
Yes, don't quote me saying to the mayor. That would be
It is
unfair and probably untrue.
Welcome to the world of politics.
Yeah.
So, from your perspective,
Yes,
sitting over there to Greg's right,
yes.
what part of this book do you feel that the existing common council members need to reference, need to kind of refresh?
Well,
Because we seem to.
90% of the time, 95% of the time, it doesn't matter. Again, the only time it matters is when there are either close votes or issues about modifications. I mean, there's nothing, for example, there's nothing in here about friendly amendments.
There isn't.
And
The one thing that we do a lot of.
I know, that's why I'm bringing it up now.
So,
It's simply, what I say, sure, make a friendly amendment as long as there's consensus, is to avoid having to make a motion to withdraw an amendment, withdraw a motion, then to create a new motion, then to have a vote on the new motion, as to whether to accept the new motion, and it just, because you can get, the whole parliamentary procedure is to simplify things rather than make them more complicated with everybody yelling at each other. Just a way of keeping order. And this is a simplification of Robert's rules. Robert's rules, first of all, nobody really knows what Robert's rules is because there are 100 different variations. But Robert's rules is basically aimed at Congress with a committee system that's more opaque than what we use. So these are just mechanisms that are not, although the charter literally says the board can determine whatever rules it wants to operate by.
right, and you see it just about every single year, but.
As a practical matter, these have been honed for a long time to cover a lot of situations. And there's sort of a general consensus. We all grew up in organizations where you make motions and second them and all that. So trying to amend them to a particular situation tends to muck, in my opinion, tends to muck things up rather than clarify them.
Right, but giving some examples of friendly amendment, for
Sure.
example, just your scenario that you just listed out.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be good to put pen and paper together or a computer screen? And-
Sure.
and is that part of your example?
It,
Because I don't remember
but,
it being
say,
friendly amendment.
but again, I'm disinclined unless unless there is something that can be articulated here by the council that they think is being done poorly, and that there's some mechanism they can think of to make it better. I don't know that there are any modifications. I don't have any suggestions as to modifications.
Right, but you just watched how I conducted a couple of agenda items. I turned to my fellow committee members and said, are you in agreement with it?
Yep.
And we're gonna move this up to full council. The clerk asked me, do we need to have that come back? So that procedure, she brought me back into the procedure that technically we should bring it back down. And I said, no. Now that gave my fellow committee members an opportunity to say, well, yes, let's have it come back. They could have said that, but they said no, or they didn't say anything at all. So it's kind of a mission.
Yeah, understand the committees in the city.
I'm not here to run items up through to council.
That's, we gotta get into a little history. The city had, prior to the open meetings law, and even after the open meetings law, the city had no committees in the classic sense. The city was run by boards and commissions. When David Brenner came here, after having been the chairman of the county board for 12 years, and the common council met as a committee of the whole. There were things like the Capital Budget Planning Commission and the Parks and Rec Commission. There were no committees. And he said, well, this is why council goes to 1 o'clock. I mean, they were going over utility bills. And are we gonna pay this or aren't we gonna pay this? There were no warrants, there were no nothing. So he said, I'm gonna create some committees. And I said, that's lovely, Dave, but the problem is there's nothing in the charter about committees. He said, well, I can appoint people, and if they wanna serve on them, they wanna serve on them. If they don't wanna serve on them, they don't wanna serve on them, that's okay. It's a way to get something done, so that we have recommendations coming to the council, so we don't start out with a clean slate. Every council meeting is crazy. So that's how they began being established. And then when the first open meetings law came in, it didn't matter because we never had a quorum at committee meetings because there were always less than 4. And so they weren't even open to the subject meetings law. They said, well, screw it, I don't care, I'm still gonna have everything open to the setup in conformance with the open meetings law. We said, okay, so we always kept them in compliance with the open meetings law, even though there wasn't a majority, and we advertised them and did all the things and treated them like the committees that are done on the county level. But still, in the city, the committees don't have, there's nothing in the charter that says that if something doesn't pass through committee, or that it has to pass through committee before it can come to council. There's absolutely nothing there.
Correct.
And there's absolutely nothing that says if the council moves something forward, or they vote in favor, or they don't vote in favor, there's absolutely nothing that says you can't bring it in front of council unless it's gone through committee first. It's just, that's the practice.
Sure.
That is done. And so getting parliament, in a sense, parliamentary procedure has never applied to committees, simply because the committees don't, in many, I keep tripping over my own words, in many legislative bodies, including the county, including New York State, including the federal government, if there are matters that are assigned to committees for consideration, if they don't pass through the committee, they die.
Right.
They come to the committee,
Right. But we're not set up.
they die. Right,
That's
right.
our
The city is not set up that way. So very often people come in looking from the outside and saying, well, you're not following the requirements that the committee can do this or this or this. And that's because they misunderstand the structure of the city. So in my opinion, and the parliamentary rules apply to council, but they don't apply to committees.
Okay. So I was giving you an example as the chairman of this committee,
Right.
that I'm not just arbitrarily saying, well, I disagree with you, I'm still gonna move this item
Sure.
to full council.
Sure.
Even though I know legally I have the right to bring it to full
Well,
council.
again,
anyways.
when you say I'm going to move it to council, you're doing that on your authority as a committee chairman, but there's nothing in the charter or anywhere that says the committee chairman has the right to bring things to council.
There's nothing in this that says the committee chairman has the ability to move it up.
Absolutely right, that's correct, that's my point. Which is why when the common council adopts this, the common, in my opinion, I've always interpreted it, that the common council adopts this for the council meetings, not for committee meetings.
Correct, so, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The way I read some of this, look past page 12,
Sure.
the mayor's not supposed to be participating in our conversations.
That is an issue that you run into because there's a funny thing in our charter. Who belongs to, who are the
The
members
mayor
of
and
the
the
common
common
council?
council,
Yeah,
that's the
so,
legislative body.
yeah, so is the mayor a member of the common council? Yes. Can the members of the common council participate in discussions regarding legislation? If he's a member of the common council, he absolutely can, yes.
This must be a terminology issue.
That's,
Because we're the legislative body, he's not part of the council, he's a part of the legislative body.
the
According to
charter
the
says he's a member of the common council.
Charter says he's part of the legislative body.
No, the charter says that the common council is made up of the mayor and eight council members.
Yeah, common council constituted.
Did I say
Sorry,
common council? I thought it said legislative body.
No,
Yeah,
no. Common council is the legislative branch. The council members are the legislative branch. But so it's an anomaly in our system.
That he's allowed to participate in the
That
conversation.
the speaker,
Right.
that essentially.
The speaker, you're right, because that's the
speaker
terminology they use.
Exactly, has the authority to participate. Again, it's a problem, it always has been a problem, at least from a procedural sense.
So do we acknowledge that in accepting this, that the mayor being part of the common council is allowed to participate in the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, again, if you want to.
Yet still doesn't get to vote unless there's a tie vote.
Right. Which, by the way, play your cards right, you can never vote.
What about the announcer case?
Speaking of anomalies, it was an anomaly the other night.
That's the second one.
So, anyway, so that's the issue, and if you want to, in my mind, if you don't want to adopt this, then you're gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, I'm saying we could adopt this, but make an amendment.
I just wanna make sure that if we adopt it, we have all read it, and we know to a certain extent what we are agreeing to. It's not just doing it the way we've always done it. It's based on our understanding of these rules, which I think has been historically just doing it the way we've always done it. But I think that because I've read it, there are things that we do that are not necessarily in accordance or consistently in accordance with these. Not anything egregious, but just
And that's-
out of order or.
And that's what you have to decide. is
Right.
That frankly, there's a lot of stuff that as a parliamentarian, I've never been designated as a parliamentarian.
Right,
I mean, that I let go simply because, we're already staying too late.
right,
Ours already keeping us way too late.
right,
And that's so I try to do things to facilitate, to not intervene. I'll get, you guys will get going on something and I'll start getting twitchy and then finally I'll say, listen, guys, you gotta stop this because it goes beyond the pale.
yeah,
But the goal is to get things done in an open and fair way without using procedures to muck things up,
right.
because they can be. But this has fewer ways of mucking things up than Robert's rules.
Right.
So last meeting, some people took issue with speaking about the fire chief's salary and benefits and stuff that we were agreeing to. As that was going down, I had said executive session, and he had said
That's a
that.
that's a completely different issue.
Well, no, I'm just asking a question. So he had said that he would prefer it started there, but now he would like it public. So does that then mean we do not do executive session because he said he wants it public? public?
Executive session has nothing to do with Robert's rules or the rules of procedure. Executive session has to do with the open meetings law. Under the open meetings law, that's in New York State statute, open meetings law has nothing to do with this procedure. Open meetings law says that, Lauren can tell you all about the open meetings. The open meetings law says that all public business has to be done in an open meeting, unless there's an exception, unless there's a statutory exception. And even if there is a statutory exception, you can only go into executive session if there's a motion made, a statement of what the exception is that causes you to be going, that makes you want to go into executive session. And there has to be a majority vote of the body to authorize you to go into executive session. Again, we treat it as though whenever anybody wants to go into executive session, we say it's a personal matter regarding the fire chief. And everybody raises their hands and says, okay, it's done. But there is no mandate ever, nothing is ever mandated that you go into executive session. You can only go into executive session if you're following an exception in the statute. So even if you said, well, I would prefer to do that, or if you said, I want to do an executive session, you moved to go into this executive session, and a majority of the board did not vote in favor of putting an executive session, then it's an executive session. Nothing is ever required to be an executive session. Nothing.
Thank you.
So, and that has nothing to do with this. That has with New York State law and the open meetings law.
I was just curious because it just happened and there were several people that were pretty upset about it.
That if they were upset, it's because they don't understand the law.
So-
There is no right to talk about public salaries. There's no right to talk about public salaries in executive session at all. The only reason you can talk about a public salary in executive session is because you're talking about an individual personnel matter. The issue of how much you pay your fire chief cannot be done in executive session. That has to be done in public because you're just talking about spending public money.
So do you want to talk about one of your examples?
Sure, now I'm on the spot. Okay. One of my examples of ways that we could do better with this, or
Well,
a
that you
different.
felt that the culture of the common council differs from this book. I thought that's what you just said. I think it's not what you
Definitely
did.
need friendly amendments.
Right, I mean, if you look at,
Because ultimately, I think it's probably advantageous for us as a council to come in an hour early to a common council meeting and have David do a presentation on friendly amendments, on the things, our nuts and bolts. I mean, the cheat sheet is okay, but it's
well, I
not
think
hitting
that's
everything.
the thing, is that, you know, we have these cheat sheets, we have this resource, but how many of us, including the chair of the common council, have actually read this with regard to how we're gonna operate our meetings?
Correct.
I don't see anything wrong with these procedures. What I see is that we don't always do it, like you said, not to get bogged down in it, but,
You should understand, if you read this, you understand that at any point, any member of the body can raise a parliamentary point,
Mhm.
right,
can raise a point of personal
Point of
privilege,
order.
a business privilege, you can raise a privilege.
Right.
And you can interrupt for the purpose of a privilege,
right,
and say, I'd like parliamentary determinations of whether what the mayor's currently doing is in compliance with our rules.
right.
And those are, but you gotta know the rules in order to
Maybe
do
we
that.
just should start doing that. I would just like us to see, I feel like, you know, committees are a little bit more casual, to your point, there's more, you know, sort of free discussion, we agree on things mainly by acclamation, but, you know, I think all of that is in service of our council meetings being, efficient and orderly, and they are not always, sometimes they're a little more casual, and I'm a casual person, but I think that having procedure, doing things like raising a point, you you know,
Or things like calling the question.
yeah,
You know, every once in a while, I'll be sitting there for half an hour and I'll finally say, okay, could somebody call a question?
right,
You know, again, and that's not my job.
right.
I'm not a member of the town council.
Right.
But I sometimes just reach a saturation point.
So,
Right.
again, why don't you start preparing to do a presentation?
I'd be happy.
I think it's in our best interest, because like,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of Shannon for her first year, there was times where you were going, can I do this?
Yeah, I didn't even get a cheat sheet.
You can
You
get,
don't have a cheat sheet?
I didn't get one.
Dave
I
stole
wasn't
your
good
cheat
enough.
you know, it's like,
David's
like
better.
he didn't get the parliamentary books.
Yeah, yeah.
Carrie, do you know that, the
I just found out
The
last
seventh.
council meeting that it's just gone.
yeah.
Oh,
Another
no.
book. Someone
Is
did
that in
a
her
sticker.
budget? We have the council.
How are we
budget
gonna
is
pay
like
for this?
$5.
How are we paying for this?
I'll make a charitable donation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Anonymous.
I-
We'll have to accept it at the next meeting,
Yeah.
okay?
All right, so,
Um,
anything else, David, that you want to add for tonight?
No, like I said, my only thought is, don't, if there are things that are not being followed, I don't think that's the fault of the book. I think it's the
Right.
fault of
Our
the
understanding.
council members not knowing how to
Sure.
do it. And again, I'm happy to talk to you as long as you forgive me for occasionally saying,
Well,
saying, call any question, we'll talk about this for 3/4 of an hour.
so what about the second meeting in February? That still gives us time to read this book.
Sure. That sounds great.
Put on something for agenda, whoever's doing the committee report, if council said we're gonna do it, schedule it, and I'll be happy to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
Should capture that. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else?
For today?
Today?
No.
Great, thanks for putting the agenda together.
Oh. Not for today.
Not for today?
Thank you, David.
I'm going home to have meatloaf. I'm very excited.
That's what I work.
That's crazy. I love your cardigan, by the way. I wanted to tell you this whole time.
Thank you, David.
It's the,
Are we adjourned?
it's the
We are. Motion.
You haven't adjourned us.